Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
First, a word from our sponsor. The Daily Compliance News for January 13, 2022, the Prince Andy to face trial in U.S. edition. And we begin with that story from NPR as a federal judge in New York has denied Prince Andrew's request to dismiss the Giuffre lawsuit against him for sexual harassment. She claims that Prince Andrew had sexually harassed her, and he claimed that he was entitled to have the suit dismissed because of her prior settlement with Jeffrey Epstein, which included all potential defendants. I think any lawyer would know that is not a cited or is not language that has enough specificity to protect a third party, and it's not clear whether he was a defendant, potential defendant, or no defendant in her eyes. Anyway, I think the court came to the right conclusion. A real black eye for Prince Andrew and the royal family if this goes forward. Next up from Forbes, an article by Kaivan Alikana. Those who listen to Innovation and Compliance will remember that name. I've had him on the pod from Compliance AI. And he talks about the pandemic drove up compliance costs and how you can get them under control. He goes on to talk about some strategies to modernize your compliance program, obviously in terms of using data and tech, and lists 5 steps to get runaway compliance costs under control. Number 1, create continuous improvement. Number 2, automate labor-intensive repetitive processes. 3, make it easier to automate processes and meet continuous improvement targets. 4, continue shifting compliance spend from CapEx to OpEx. And finally, tech won't solve everything. Remember the human capital. Next up from the Register, a first-time contributor to the Daily Compliance News, the California Department of Fair Employment and Housing is appealing a judge's ruling which prevented it from intervening in Activision Blizzard's $18 million settlement with the EEOC. The DFEH claims it has confidential information it wants to share with the court and needs to be a part of the settlement so it can protect the citizens of California, which apparently doesn't think the EEOC can do, and it'll probably drive up the cost of the settlement. And then finally from Reuters, a U.S. judge has rejected Facebook's claim or request to dismiss the FTC's antitrust lawsuit against it. So it's going to be interesting to see how the FTC does fares against Facebook and whether they can tighten up antitrust law under the new administration, as they clearly want to do so. So a big loss for Facebook. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.
This podcast is a part of the C-Suite Radio Network. For more top business podcasts, visit c-suiteradio.com.